Okay, good.
Hi, John. We are live. I am Kate Howe, co-founder of Postcards for Parents.
And I'm John Stewart. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I am the proud clinical director for Postcards for Parents.
It's great to see you today, John. And I'm glad that we're tackling the topic that we are today, which has to do with body boundaries, body consent, teaching children bodily autonomy so that they can kind of know their own boundaries around consent later in life when sexual activity comes in. But that's something, being able to do that later is something that starts really early. Mm-hmm. So, but it's also, I guess I'm just curious, how do you sort of think about disentangling, like, how to put boundaries around touch? I know that it's not something that you can take away completely. So kind of start from the beginning and maybe talk about how important touch is for babies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, there are a few things that we know from over the course of development, over the course of life, that have as much power, positive power, than touch. We know that with little ones, we know that with infants, skin on skin is associated with capacity to regulate body temperature, to regulate, it has an impact on cortisol levels, it has an impact on blood pressure, it has an impact on immune system. So, I mean, you won't go into an obstetrics unit these days without seeing on the wall all over, any place where people can look, skin on skin. So, I mean, that's where it begins. It begins with the fact that we regulate both physiologically and emotionally in the context of connection. And there is no connection that's more profound, primal, important to us than physical connection. So, I think that the sanctity of our bodies and our teaching that to kids is critical. It's important, but it is also very, very important that we not instill a sense of fear, a sense that you can't trust people in the context of touch. It's a complicated variable, and when we think about how do we teach kids how to manage that dance of physical intimacy, I think you've heard me say it before, stealing from Mary Gordon, the notion that empathy is caught, not taught. And I think that body respect, body appreciation, I think it's caught, not taught. I think that children who grow up with parents who read the child's cues well about whether or not the child, needs to be embraced, to be comforted, needs playful touch. There's a whole body of literature on rough and tumble play, which is all about touch. So I think it's largely tied to the process of kids experiencing their parents, seeing how their parents manage boundaries with each other, seeing how their parents manage, what kind of narratives their parents put together with different types of touch. Kids who see parents who are physically affectionate. This is a gift. I mean, it is in some families. Some cultures are more so that way and others less so. So it's not to say that, if your family doesn't happen to be a place where there's a lot of physical touch, that, oh my God, your children are in trouble. But I will say those who experience, joyful and connected touch between themselves and parents, between their parents, and are able to, the parents who are able to read the narrative. If the child says, no, leave me alone. I've got a granddaughter who's 4, who she is a kid who, when she hurts herself, it isn't easy for her to let you comfort her. And her older brother is the opposite. And just reading those cues and finding ways that are comforting, that do honor what the child is needing and what the parents are wanting to give. So I'm not big on the importance of the utility of highly structured kind of cognitive good touch, bad touch curriculum. That's just very common. I'm not saying it doesn't do good. I'm just saying it has to be done with a great deal of sensitivity and recognition that touch is so essential.
Mm-hmm. And so to kind of back up a little bit, I'm sure that each individual has kind of like differences in the level of touch that they kind of want and need, and the kind. So there's something innate, and then there's also what we learn from our families and probably later on, right? So,
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess I'm just thinking because, you said that part of how kids learn this is from their families, but if they are, in a family that sort of doesn't have a lot of physical affection, then they might not be getting what they need, but then also, kind of not be comfortable with it later on. Is that correct?
I think that, I think that can happen. I mean, I think there are, a lot of different reasons why kids, you're kind of speaking to a temperament of with respect to touch. And I think there are a lot of different variables that enter into that. Some of it is what has happened, that they experienced, have they had touch be kind of processed in an unconscious way as something that's soothing and helpful. But then there are also issues like sensory integration. And we know that some children, the touch is a little more complicated for some children. They experience it as in some way not soothing. I know that one of the sad things that we see was, particularly with premature babies, one of the primitive instincts that babies have is that if you touch their back, the younger, as they mature, when you touch their back, they curl forward. Children who have developmental delays in that regard, or have the more primitive instinct still in them because they were a little premature, you touch their backs and they arch their back. And that the experience of a parent of having a little one, when you try to pick them up and you try to comfort them, and they arch their back, can create in kind of a complicated and sad dynamic where the parent thinks the child doesn't want to be comforted and the little one doesn't know how to, get what they need. So some of this dance is starts very early, and it can be really, really complicated. We have colicky babies where parents are unable to comfort them, and then parents begin to lose faith and belief in their touch. And there's a lot of variables. Just being a parent is complicated. Being a child is complicated.
Yeah. And how, I don't think that most parents kind of stop to consider how they are with touch. You know what I mean? It's something that feels so primal that we just we have our reactions and that it feels like what it is. It doesn't feel like something either that we learned or something that, could be different, I think. So how would you even recommend that parents, a baby will have its own set of issues. How would you recommend that parents know what they are bringing to it so that they can kind of see their baby as separate, but also attune and work with what the baby needs?
I guess that's the question, isn't it? And it's a hard one. I think that when you have other caretakers, if dad has a mom or mom has a dad or mom has another mom or whatever the constellation is, when we're able to see how a child interacts with others and we see it go well or we see it not go well, I think we're always trying to look at that. I think we look at, most of us know something about our comfort with touch. Some of us are really comfortable with it, and some of us are a little more reticent. And it's just it's not that one is better, or it just needs to match, because we actually know there are kids who are a little less relationally focused, who, if they have a highly relationally focused parent, it can be experienced as intrusive and not it's not a good match. So it is all about attunement. It's all about match. And I think for a parent, the most important thing you can do is kind of question yourself. Say, what do I know about me? What do I know about what this little one might need? How do I see him interact with other people? What seems to work for him or her, what doesn't? So it's a process. It's kind of an empirical process where you're just staying open to the fact that the way you are is not the way one should be. It's just the way you are. and your little one may be different. And so you got to figure out how to make that dance work. And maybe when they even get older, you can help them create narratives about it, saying, you know what, sweetie, you just love good hugs, and I watch you get good hugs from your mom, and they're just, and you know what, I like to give good hugs, but I'm somebody who I kind of have to be in the right moment, and I don't ever want you to think that when you come in and dad's thinking about something else and he doesn't give you a good hug, that doesn't mean that I don't love your hugs, or doesn't mean that I don't enjoy you. So just that ability to create narratives to help kids understand what they're feeling is really helpful as well, because not everybody has to be the same. But kids do need ways of helping them understand why they're different.
And also, it sounds like even just kind of being aware that this could be a thing. I mean, to even think about it in the first place, because I think probably that it's often that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I think once again, back to kids with sensory integration issues, many of those kids have a very classic dilemma that they face. And there are a lot of normal kids, pretty fundamentally normal kids who have some slower development of their sensory system. But things like light touch doesn't work for them, but deep touch, touching, give you a big hug, that works. And so it is about kind of experimenting and finding out what works. And I think for parents, if they have a child who pulls back, needing to be very careful to not express a sense of, that they're hurting you, or they're, that's because the whole thing around our bodies are very deeply connected with our core self. And so if we have a sense of that our bodies are not functioning in a way that works well for our mom or our dad, then that's problematic. It can create shame.
Yeah. So body autonomy, like feeling that you are in control of your body, is kind of the foundation to being able to say, no, I don't like that, or yes, I do like this, or this sounds fun to me. How does it seem to you? But yet when kids are born, they're not autonomous at all. I mean, when they're in utero, they're literally part of the mother's body. And then as they, when they're babies, they're incredibly dependent and still like linked to the mother's body in many ways. And so it's like a slow process of kind of coming into autonomy. So how, and especially before kids can talk, and when parents still need to do so much for them, and there might be other issues going on, how do you recommend kind of instilling body autonomy? How does that develop in somebody?
Well, I mean, I think it's by listening to kids, by reading their cues. I don't think it's as much a narrative. I think that when we make it a narrative, then it can become more complicated. I'm not saying when I say a narrative, when we make it a directive, saying you kind of need to understand good touch and bad touch, and because the other variable that gets mixed into this is childhood sexuality, and which makes many adults very, very uncomfortable.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Children have, very clearly have sexual feelings, and they're, sometimes they're self-directed, sometimes they're other-directed, because one of the things that we're hoping is to manage the child's relationship with their body in a way that they do have the ability to say, no, I don't want that, but also in the ability to be able to say, yeah, I do want that. That's a good thing. So it's finding that balance. I don't. I think that we want to do everything we can to avoid shaming, because shaming around body-based issues seems to be a pretty easy thing to do unintentionally. Little ones who are touching themselves, in public, and parents are embarrassed by it, which is kind of embarrassing. It's not, how do we manage this in a way? My recommendation, whenever you're having to deal with something like that, is to do so as playfully as possible, because it is very difficult to be gently playful and also shaming at the same time. I mean, it could be that, that does feel good, buddy, but you can't do that. Okay? It's about your attitude about it that's accepting, and then you move from that point. So I think that, and then I think that so often, the whole idea of body autonomy, we're talking about, protecting children from being victims of predatory folks who are in some way more powerful than them, either by age or by just their inherent social power. I think that the more we are just kind of real with our kids from the standpoint of saying, if you're watching them deal with somebody who seems a little more powerful, or if your kid comes home and says something that gives you a little bit of a sense that there may be something going on in terms of the violation of their self. I mean, sexual play between peers is not sexual abuse. It is normative. And so parents
at all ages?
Well, pretty much. I mean, you show me mine, I'll show you yours. That there's just now. Does that mean now if there's a power differential, then it starts getting more complicated. And the power differential could be children of the same age, but one who's just maybe one who has been abused by an adult and who has this intensified sexual energy that comes in. So I'm not trying to make that. I'm not trying to be too simplistic. But I do also want to be really clear that sexual curiosity, sexual play between children, pretty much at all ages, is normative, and that you want to manage it in a way. It doesn't mean that you want to say, "Oh, it's all okay." No, sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes you're going to see a brother and sister who have been taking baths together, and now they reach a point where the big brother seems more interested in his little sister's body than he used to. And so you go, oh, all right, well, now it's time for them to take baths. You just introduce the idea. Kind of reach a point and your privates become a little more private. That's why they call them private. And so maybe we'll wear swimsuits when you come into the bath together. You just try to keep it moving forward, because I think that it is a very easy place for kids to pick up on parental discomfort and anxiety, and then to internalize that in a way that's complicated. So I think that, the more I think about it, the more I talk about it. I don't have any really good, quick answers for this. I do think that it is just an overall, it's really tied to the child's experience of the world being attuned and to them and responsive. And that when that is the case, and then the child is in a far better position to expect that things are going to go the way that they want them and need them to go. But it does get complicated because, sexual feelings, if there's sexual play between kids, it is self-reinforcing. I mean, kids find erotic touch kind of exciting. I mean, it's just, an erotic play exciting. And it's just, there's anything about this. There's nothing about this that's really simple in how you manage it. You just keep your head. You want to avoid shame. You want to protect kids from being in situations that they're not ready to manage. And then you kind of go from there. And when you do find, if you do have a sense that something's going on, you go with a light hand towards exploring that. And I see, one of the groups of kids that I used to see referred in schools oftentimes for concern that they were being sexually abused were kids with impulse difficulties, kind of kids with various degrees of ADHD, who the problem is they don't screen the environment well for whether or not now is the moment that I can do this. These kids, they have impulses, they have sexual feelings, they have sexual thoughts, and they express them. And that how important it is to help those kids not feel shame about it, but also at the same time learn how to choose when and where you bring those things out. So I know I'm talking all around the issue to some extent, Kate.
Yeah, well, it's just incredibly complicated because it's a balance between so many things, and it's hard to know who is balanced. Like, the parent might be off balance in some ways, the kid might be off balance in some ways, the environment might be off balance in some ways, and so it's hard to kind of even know kind of where the center of gravity is.
I think that's well said, Kate. This, it's kind of in the management of this. I've often felt like my feet were firmly planted in midair.
Yeah.
These issues do come to me periodically, pretty regularly, actually. When I used to consult the schools and treatment programs, it was very common. And I'm not trying to dismiss the importance of managing these things well, but I want to be really careful not to throw the baby out with the bath. And say the most important thing is that we instill within kids a sense of that their bodies are at risk and they've got to protect them.
Yeah.
That's not what we're looking for.
Because just to kind of follow that line of reasoning, what happens when kids kind of get that message, either that touch is dangerous or that they need to kind of like never do it, or, be really worried about adults who might be showing affection in a physical way?
Yeah. I mean, I think what happens is multi-level. I mean, I think it can have an impact on the social dynamic. It could be that, as the grandparent or the great aunt or somebody wants to give the little one a hug and they kind of pull back, and they, then what does the grandparent then feed back to them, in terms of, so there can be kind of those kind of social levels. I think that there can be a rigidity that kind of comes in. I keep going back to the word shame. It is just an arena where shame is so easy to instill. Shame is, we've said it many times before, but shame is not guilt. I mean, for kids to be playing doctor underneath the table with their parents just standing over, it's okay if they feel a little guilt because they know they're not supposed to be doing that. But shame is the core level, the sense that there's something fundamentally wrong with me. It's about myself. And so, it isn't that parents can't say, hey, I don't want you doing that. That's not, there'll be a day when you can do that, and just keep it as light as possible. And saying just different people have different feelings about this stuff. We really want to respect it.
Okay. Well, so I mean, so that general strategy, which I think we can all agree on, different people have different, feelings, comfort levels, et cetera. That really leads into the conversation about consent. So it's like you have to figure out, you have to have the conversation with this other person, and when kids are very little, that's kind of probably hard to do among peers. And I guess I'm also curious, like, how to work that into a family life, because some people say, like, even when you're changing the diaper as a parent, you should be saying, I'm going to touch you now, I'm just changing your diaper, like with that kind of level of kind of verbalizing of it. And I'm curious, is that helpful, and how I've lost your video, John.
Yeah, okay, let's see.
All right, we'll just keep talking.
There we go. Good. We're back. Is that helpful? I mean, here's the deal. I think when parents can, whatever makes sense to them, I guess, on some level, but you don't want to have the parent's interaction with the child kind of structured and framed within an anxiety, within a fear. I mean, I don't, as a species, we have not been telling our children that we're about to touch them when we're changing them. And I think, I'm not saying everything that's happened in our evolution is okay. It's not. But I do think that there are some normative kinds of touching that if you move into this kind of left brain labeling it before you do it with a child who's comfortable with you, then I think that's unfortunate. But if you have a child that's not comfortable with you, I mean, I think one of the things that in my work with abused kids, in my work with really dysregulated and upset kids, how important it is to make certain that you are letting them know what's going on, and saying, buddy, is it okay if I give you I give you a hug? You did such a great job with that. And they say, no, okay, I get it. How about a fist bump? I will oftentimes have parents and children, adolescents, let's say, in the office with me for family therapy sessions. A lot of my practice is organized around that. And it's very common for me at the end of a therapy session, if it feels like it's workable, to have the family give themselves a group hug. It's playful. It's not, it's not meant to be any big deal, but it is a way of touching, and that. But I can sometimes read an adolescent as I about to say this and go, that isn't working for them. They're not having it, and so I'll very quickly reframe and go, let's do it. Let's do a group fist bump, and usually I can get them to move into that sort of place. So I think it always goes back to just trying to read what it is that works in the given moment, and when you do that, I think whether it's with a baby or with a toddler or a teenager, I think it works. I mean, with our older kids, and back many years ago, I'm trying to remember her name and the name of the book. Reviving Ophelia. It was a book about adolescent girls, and they're reaching a point where they have to make the transition to recognizing their sexuality, and then their dads recognizing their sexuality, and what happens to the intimacy between them and the physical intimacy that it can get complicated. So I think that it is important, particularly if a child has enjoyed touch and it's a part of them, and now they're getting older and it's still important to find some way to do touch. One of the things that I have found to be remarkably successful with teenagers, boys and girls, is for moms or dads to offer them a foot rub. Most of them think, oh, that's far enough for me. I think it feels pretty good. It's kind of hard to not, and to have little rituals about, come here, I'll give you a foot rub, and maybe get some lotion and put it on, and just give them a foot rub, and that's something that's done in the TheraPlay model, which is all around the idea of strengthening connections between parents and children. So I just, it is a complicated one. When I saw that we were going to talk about it, Kate, I thought, I wonder what I have to say that's useful.
Well, I wanted to follow up on your just story about the adolescents, and is that would you say that that's like a normal? I know it's a normal thing for adolescents to kind of pull away from their families, but would you say when an adolescent doesn't want to hug their family, does that come from like their boundaries not having been respected earlier? So they're kind of like,
I don't think so. Okay. I don't think so. I think I may have told you this story. My son hates it when I tell it, and he's 40 now. And his own kids are struggling with it. But when we always had a rule in our family, we had a kind of big farmhouse, and that before the kids went to bed, that they needed to come and tell us they were going to bed so we could give them a hug or say goodnight, whatever it was. And when they were younger, we'd go tuck them in. But he got to where he was, he wasn't liking the goodnight hug. But his mom and I decided we were not going to have him go to bed without some kind of touch. So what we ultimately ended up on, he would come into the room, he'd say, "I'm going to bed." He'd put out his finger like that. And we'd put it out and we'd say, "Good night, Sammy." And we'd touch it. It was an E.T. kind of experience.
Yeah, I love that.
But it was just a way of saying, I'm not going to stop touching you.
Yeah.
You're my kid. I love you, and you need it, and I want it. But at the same time, it needed to be something that he didn't experience as in some way infantilizing.
Right.
And now he's a great hugger. But it took a while.
Yeah, I mean, well, I was going to say, I've also read that when families really pull back on the kind of affectionate touch around adolescents, then the only touch that's kind of available to kids is sexual touch with peers,
Absolutely.
and that can kind of push them in that direction more than they might otherwise want.
Absolutely. And I think the other touch is athletics and things like that. I mean, touch comes, people will take it how they can find it, but you're absolutely right. I think that when there is it feels like that avenue isn't available, and then it can certainly get channeled into sexual touch. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we kind of like return to the theme of consent, bodily autonomy and consent, like it really just seems to me like that is the core of like feeling like each child is in control of what happens to their body, and they can say yes and no, and kind of go from there. I guess when kids, and I'm particularly thinking about girls, are like reaching adolescence, and you know, I mean, and I experience this as a parent. It's like I am very aware of how they might be viewed by other people in terms of like a way that to me seems over sexualized.
Yeah.
But I don't want to kind of put that. I don't want to put that worry, I guess, on them, or like even that not to be thinking about for as long as possible. Do you have
whatever you do carefully. It's remarkable how easy it is to have for adolescent girls to feel like they are in some way being shamed for their sexuality, and so it's just I think it's not the level of sensitivity needed for that is going to have to be something that has evolved over that child's life. And so the parent does say things like, you know, you look really pretty. It's kind of hard for me sometimes to think about how grown up you're starting to look and how people might look at you that way. But, you know, you got to figure it out, sweetheart. You know, and I believe in you. I believe in you. Commenting on your kids' clothing is complicated. I mean, it's really complicated. I mean, you know, the reality of clothing as an extension of the child's sense of self. You know, they're trying on these different ways of being. And I'm not saying that you never set limits on it. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you have to buy clothing for them that you don't want them to wear. But know that they are going to wear what makes them feel attractive. And part of what's going to make them feel attractive are things that have, for girls in particular, but guys in a little different way, same thing, are things that are going to promote them being sexualized to some extent. And it's hard. And so I think you just try to stay loose with it. You try to, I think it is okay to talk about some of your own experiences of finding yourself, you know, kind of treated in a sexualized way at an early point in your life, and just say, you know, that might not happen to you. It might, you know, sometimes you make up stories about yourself so that you can have a conversation that is, you know, the Milton Erickson's notion that the best way to get a man to talk about his brother is to talk about your brother. And so kids can talk about this. It's great, but it's very difficult. You know, one of the best ways to get an adolescent to not talk to you is ask them questions. So it's not easy to keep that door open. And sometimes what you'll find is there'll be a moment where you'll see your kids distressed, and they may not be able to tell you what it is. And you may sense that they've found themselves in a situation that they weren't ready for, that they didn't want. And those are very difficult moments. Those are, and a lot of parents have them. It's kind of a crossroad. And the main thing that you have to do in those moments is not dig for information. You dig for information, even if you get it, you may have moved things back. I think you stay open to whatever they have to say, but you primarily stay with their emotion.
What so I'm hearing a lot of like how touchy it is to try to manage from the point of view of a parent, to try to like kind of either make like to strong boundaries, to weak boundaries, to like to say too much, to say too little. Like, how do you, I mean, the ideal is to you know, for your child to kind of feel empowered to say, I understand that sometimes there's like physical differentials and stuff, but like, let's go back to like that. Like, how do you empower your child to say yes and say no and say strongly what they
let them first of all, you let them watch you. They let them watch you have good boundaries, not necessarily with them. I'm not talking about, but with others. Let them see and talk out loud about your own experiences. You know, that in the moment, so that they learn, they absorb a lot of that from you. I think that you know, beyond that, I mean, I think it's okay if you see if you see your child give an expression of not liking something that has a physical aspect, say, to give them words to it. You didn't like how that felt, did you? I got that. So, you can say no. You can say, Granddad, I don't want you to touch me, or, whatever it is. That's you do give them permission to be able to do that. The main thing is dealing with almost any aspect of social emotional development is you try to figure out how to stay connected with your kid through the process. You don't become, and do not let yourself get so lost in trying to get data, information, that the relationship becomes feels less and less important to the child, and the information feels more and more important. And so there's just, I don't think a parent can go through parenting without having some moments where you go around evolving sexuality, where you go, I'm not, and so you just try not to be too intense. Share your own stuff. Express belief in them. Normalize much of what they're feeling and doing, because normalizing it mitigates shame. Shame drives it underground and actually then makes it more likely to be acted out. That's the dilemma with shame. It doesn't really help suppress problematic behaviors of this nature.
And I mean, I think all of what you're saying in terms of like staying with their emotions, not digging for data. Part of that is also making yourself a safe place for them to come and tell anything that they would be worried about or questioning, or et cetera. And
they may not be able to come and tell. It may be so vulnerable that all they've got is a feeling that they can't share with you. And so that's where your attunement, you're being able to be with them and say, even being able to say, sweetie, I know you may not be able to tell me what's going on right now, but I know you're struggling. I know there's something happened, or you're feeling something, and it's okay if you can't tell me. If you can, that's great too, but it's okay if you can't. And then you match your affect with them. It's back to what we talked about with co-regulation. You remain present, and what will oftentimes happen is when they see that you can be with them, they start finding words, and they start bringing this data from the lower, right limbic system up into the left hemisphere where words live, and they say one word or two words that then gives you a cue as to what's going on, and then you kind of go from there. But it's about arriving emotionally. And not getting too lost in or impatient in the need to understand what happened.
Backing up a little bit, maybe to like earlier childhood. What about, I mean, you'd mentioned roughhousing briefly. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the benefits of that, but also like, games like red light, green light, or even playing doctor, like things where there is some kind of element of like the child putting a boundary on a game like that. And then, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I'll come back to that.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I think that touch, with boys in particular, I mean, I'm not saying it can't, but that rough and tumble play, the way that the way that adolescent boys are friends, they hit each other. You go into the locker room, they're snapping each other with towels. They're doing all of this kind of this dance of connection that isn't too close. Generally speaking, you can find women use words more. They develop more rapidly in terms of their language abilities, and will use words. It doesn't. I think that the idea of touch in the form of wrestling or playing Twister or whatever it is, it is normative. It is, you watch puppies, you watch squirrels, you watch any of the mammals. There's that stuff, and it's part about learning how to touch, learning how to regulate emotion in the context of touch, so that it doesn't go too far. Nobody gets hurt. So I think that the rough housing or rough and tumble play, as the researchers talk about it, it's important. It's a part of being a kid and learning to master all of those various feelings: the longing for connection, the longing for domination, the longing for power, the longing for all those things that are part of what we are.
Mm-hmm. And would you just kind of let kids at it, kind of free flow? I mean, I know that also like parents wrestling with kids is beneficial, and that's we actually do that in our family a lot to kind of just have fun and release emotions. But is it, I mean, for example, like having a safe word, or with siblings particularly, it's like one can be saying stop, again and again and again before the other one will kind of like listen to that. And as a parent, should you be kind of enforcing like stop the first time you hear it, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's once again, I think that's complicated, because sometimes that's a part of their dance. Mm-hmm. and you do want to check out with everybody, and maybe in a quiet time before bedtime. Does that feel okay when you and your brother are wrestling like that, or would you like it to not go quite that far, or just finding ways to say it's okay. I think that more often than not, the what happens between siblings is really, everybody's participating in it on some level. Mm-hmm. The less powerful one is oftentimes the one who's most powerful in terms of drawing the parents in to kind of as an ally to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I think those moments are delicate, and I think once again framing it, as you say, guys, you got to stop it. I know you're just having fun. I love to watch you guys have fun, but this is going a little too far. Somebody's going to get hurt, and then somebody's going to be sad. I don't want that. Just you try to stay as and I say it here like, oh, they're going to go, oh, okay, Mom. Yeah, it doesn't happen that way. Right. Sometimes you march out your angry dad voice. Or not that I think that's the best thing to do, but with healthy kids who really aren't frightened of their parents, sometimes just getting their attention requires some of that.
Uh-huh. I mean, I guess, but I just wonder in terms of like, I hear what you're saying in terms of the sibling relationship and the dance. And I mean, that does happen in my family, that my younger daughter might be saying stop without, really wanting it to stop, or like maybe just to call me over. But I feel like that's not a great thing for her to learn either. Like if she says stop, she should mean it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, and I do think that those are things that you could have at a later point, not in the middle of it. Later, you could talk to her about that and say, "What do you think? Should I? That's it, but be a little careful about that." I think it's just something you have to massage. It's a little different in different families with different kids. What's ideal is that you're thinking about it, Kate, mm-hmm. because you're going to figure it out. I mean, and you're gonna have your kid help you figure it out, your daughter.
Right. I think we've gotten through kind of all the questions that I have. Are there other thoughts that have come to mind while we've been talking?
Well, I mean, I think that touch is such a complicated issue because it is the essence of connection. Mm-hmm. And then it does have, it does have a sexual component to it with sexual energy. So it's one of those things that we want to manage this as parents in a way that leaves our kids feeling like they can fundamentally trust themselves. Mm-hmm. And that then, that they then learn through our role modeling and through talking sometimes about, how to say no, those sort of things. I mean, it's just something that as I said before, the last thing you want to do is throw the baby out with the bath on this one, because touch is a gift. It's a blessing. It's essential to mm-hmm. us. We know, one of the hottest issues in medicine now, it was a big deal back 50 years ago, and now it's a big deal again, is therapeutic touch. The impact, training nurses to touch wounds, there is something very powerful about touch. So I just think it needs to be dealt with the sensitivity that it deserves. It can be dealt with playfulness. Recognize there is no one way to be. Lots of folks have different needs and tolerances, and that it's just a matter of figuring that out.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll return to this in different forms and different conversations, but this was really helpful for today.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kate. It's always good to talk to you.
Talk to you soon. Talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.